Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Um, we're back in session. Welcome to the 560th board meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. And I'd like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater, who got stuck in the fog this morning south of here. And news said it was bad from Modesto south, but then you're telling us it also was around Manteca.
Manteca coming forward, and then I cut across Grant Line, and everybody's going really slow there too.
Okay.
But no accidents. Everybody was safe. We're just
Glad you're here
extra
in one
precautions.
piece.
Thank you.
On my left is Mark Bradford of Sacramento. On my right is Denise Cadera of Allensworth. My name is Carl Longley, and I hail from the great and glorious metropolis of Fresno.
Second only to Merced.
State Board Member Dudek is in the audience, and Tam Dudek, and we'll be hearing from her in a few minutes. But I'd like to now introduce the Executive Officer Patrick Palupa, who will introduce the staff.
Good morning. Across the way, we have David Lancaster, counsel for the board. Next to him, Andrew Altavote, Assistant Executive Officer in the Rancho Cordova office. And next to him, Christine Urich in the Rancho Cordova office working the timer today. To my immediate right is Jessica Yar with the Office of Chief Counsel, the Senior Attorney for the Board. And in front of me, Bailey Toft Dupuis, also another attorney for the Board. To my immediate left is Adam Lapitz, Assistant Executive Officer in our Rancho Cordova office. And to his left is Kieran Longfranchi Rizzardi, Clerk to the Board and my Executive Assistant. In the audience, we have Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in our Fresno office, and Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer in our Redding office. We also have Yvonne West, the Director of the Office of Enforcement, and Mayumi Okamoto, Attorney 4 in the Office of Enforcement, and numerous staff as well.
Thank you very much. Mark, could you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have meeting procedures that I will relate to you. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda, and they are available here at the staff table and available upon request. And they're posted on the board's website. They're also summarized on the computer screens during our breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Longfranchi Rizzardi, our administrative assistant, sitting here at the staff table. Are there any further board member communications? I do have some. First of all, I'd like to thank staff for the very nice party last night. We had a holiday get-together of staff and board members. And last night I came to the realization that we have some real singers among the staff. David Lancaster, I've never seen. And Andrew, my God. And you get these guys singing together. It's a real show. And it was recorded. And oh, and Adam can sing too. But he has that deep voice that resonates. There was one big disappointment last night, and Clint would not sing. He claimed there was not enough alcohol in Sacramento to get him to sing. So anyway, it was a good time, and I want to thank staff for putting that together. Are there any further comments by board members?
No, I just want to thank the staff for the decorations. They're always so beautiful and everything, so it's very festive, and we really do appreciate it.
Christine Job, once again, is responsible for a lot of these. She makes a lot of the decorations herself too, and Kieran helps out quite a bit too. That holiday party in the executive suite, a lot of that was her handiwork.
Thank you, staff.
Moving to agenda item 15, the public forum. Do we have any cards, Corinne? Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak on any topic which is not on the agenda today? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 16. We've already did that yesterday. Moving on to agenda item 17. Uncontested calendar. This is the time and place for a public hearing.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
If I could, since we were not able to get to the state board member update yesterday,
Yes,
Tam
let's
is
do
here
that.
today. so-
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, because I made the comment we were going to hear from Tam Dudek later. I didn't
That's right. It is the chair's pleasure, after all. Good morning, and a warm welcome to Board Member Bradford. I introduce myself. I'm the State Board liaison to this region, and unfortunately, this region has not been seeing a lot of me the last 2 years because I was held captive in a tunnel, a tunnel hearing. But hopefully you'll be seeing much more of me in 2019, and I look forward to that. And as always, at the last board meeting of the year, I always want to take the time to thank the board and all of your staff for the tremendous work that you do. The protection of California's very precious water could not happen without your tremendous commitment, without your tremendous expertise, and just the tremendous hard work that you all put in day after day, month after month, and year after year. In the chair's case, decades after decades, for which it is much appreciated. Couple things at the State Water Board. I think you all know by now that former Vice Chair Steve Moore left us a few weeks ago to become General Manager of Ross Valley Sanitary District, which is closer to his home, and we'll miss him, but are very happy for him. The governor did on Wednesday appoint someone to the sanitary engineering position at the State Water Board, and that is Sean McGuire. Sean came from the State Water Resources Control Board staff in the Division of Water Rights, and before that, he was a consultant at Kennedy Jenks. So tremendous amount of experience. He did take the oath yesterday, did not go running away, and so he will be at the next board meeting next week, on which we have two relatively minor items to consider. The first one on December 11th is the adoption of amendments to the recycled water policy, which has some salts and nitrate management aspect to it, which I know your staff is very interested in. And then on the 12th, we'll be considering for the third time possible adoption of the water quality control plan update for the San Joaquin and Southern Delta salinity. And don't ask me what's going to happen. I have no idea. But as you know, the board delayed action on it in November upon request by both Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom to provide some time for discussions of potential voluntary settlement agreements to fulfill the, or to try to achieve the proposed objectives that's in the draft water quality control plan. So actually, I will apologize that I'll need to sneak out a little bit early because I will be meeting with the resources agencies and other people to get an update on the status of that negotiation. I think we are all hopeful, as we've been all along, that there will be these agreements that will get projects on the ground, that will get solutions faster and improvements faster than might otherwise happen through a long litigation process, but we will see what happens. And if there's one thing that I keep emphasizing to everyone I meet with on the water quality control plan is the plan is developed and is proposed in such a way that there is a framework built in to consider voluntary settlement agreements even after the board takes action, should we take action on the 12th or whenever, to adopt the water quality control plan. So there is this huge, I think, misbelieve this opinion that if the board takes action, that's it, it's over. All voluntary settlement agreements then cannot be considered. And as you know, that's not the case. Whenever the board takes action, whether it be the state board or the regional boards, there is always an opportunity for us to reevaluate, to reopen something and consider new information, new science, new agreements. And in this particular case, we made a special point of including in the program of implementation a condition for considering any voluntary settlement agreements that may come to us at any time in the future. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens next week. But for whatever happens, I hope the dialogue will continue and the collaboration will continue in order to solve the problems that we're all very concerned with that involves the Delta.
I would certainly hope that you have one of those very short items that can pop up from time to time. People walk in holding hands together and singing Kumbaya, and but it doesn't happen often. I hope that we're able to get there quickly. Any questions?
No, and I'll just thank you for the statements that the water quality control plan is a hot issue in Merced. And so I get approached all the time because sometimes constituents don't recognize the difference between the regional board and the state board. And all I can tell them is that that I trust that the state board is reasonable, that they will listen to concerns, and that they'll be treated fairly, both certainly at the board member level and with staff. And so I've been in contact with a couple of board members, and they both have expressed their openness to consider settlement agreements and to understand that it might not be perfect, but maybe not going forward isn't perfect either. So to the extent that constituents from our area call you, I really appreciate you taking time to listen to their concerns and consider what they tell you. So thank you.
I want to thank you very much, Tam. Your service is greatly appreciated. And we're going to be talking to you on CV salts. That's a topic that we talked about on January 30th, 2006, and it has just cascaded since then. Good. We'll return to agenda item 17. It's always great to be brought up to date on what's happening at state board level. So this is the time and place for a public hearing to consider adoption of uncontested items 21 through 24. That includes waste discharge requirements and enforcement, MPDS permits, waste discharge requirements, MPDS permits, time schedule order rescissions, also change of name and or ownership. Does anyone wish to discuss any of these items? I have a card from Tom Woke. Okay, thank you. Are there any late revisions?
No late revisions.
There are no late revisions. In that case, I'll close the hearing and I'll ask for a motion and a second.
I would move to approve the uncontested calendar as presented.
I'll second.
Carmen has moved. Mark has seconded. Call the roll, please.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Cordara?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 18. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider waste discharge requirements for the cities of Fresno and Clovis Regional Reclamation Facility in Fresno County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Since there's no one present to contest this matter, yes.
There is nobody present to contest it. We have a very short presentation for the board's information, if it's the board's pleasure to have that presentation.
Since there's no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed with a brief staff presentation. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time before we begin the presentation?
There are no legal issues with this, Dr. Longley.
Thank you, David. So we're ready to begin with the staff presentation.
All right, good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Scott Hatton, and I'm a supervising water resource control engineer in your Fresno office. The next item for your consideration is the renewal of the waste discharge requirements for the city of Fresno and Clovis, the regional wastewater reclamation facility, which we'll refer to as the facility in this presentation.
And you're talking about the Jensen Avenue plant?
Yes.
Thank you.
This map identifies the cities of Fresno and Clovis and the facility, which is to the southwest. The facility serves the cities of Fresno and Clovis, Pinedale Water and Utilities districts to the north, and several unincorporated areas within Fresno County. The city of Clovis maintains the rights and capacity to discharge 9.3 million gallons per day, or about 11% of the total flow discharged to the facility. The city of Fresno is responsible for the day-to-day facility operations. This aerial image provides an overview of the facility, including its groundwater monitoring well network and the on-site and off-site use area locations where effluent from the facility can be discharged. The facility has 1,700 acres of disposal ponds consisting of 83 ponds that collectively provide a total storage capacity of approximately 11,000 acre feet. The facility's main method of discharge is by percolation and evaporation in the on-site disposal ponds, as well as the irrigation of non-food crops on agricultural land, both on-site and off-site of the facility. Let's see, this is. I will now briefly introduce and define a few technical terms that I will be using in the following slides, including recycled water, secondary treatment, tertiary treatment, and disinfection. The city of Fresno recycles the treated effluent from the facility. The treated effluent is referred to as recycled water or recycled municipal water. According to Title 22 of the California Code of Regulations, recycled water is the effluent from the treatment of wastewater of municipal origin. If the discharger intends to utilize recycled water, it must comply with regulations specified in Title 22. Depending on the type of treatment, the recycled water can be used in different ways. Two broad terms that refer to the level of treatment from a domestic wastewater treatment facility are secondary treatment and tertiary treatment. Secondary treatment means the organic matter in the wastewater has been stabilized and contains dissolved oxygen, or in other words, the wastewater has been oxidized. An example of a secondary treatment system is activated sludge. This facility can use this type of recycled water for irrigation of fodder and fiber crops for animals not producing milk for human consumption. Tertiary treatment provides additional treatment beyond secondary treatment that includes filtration to remove residual suspended solids. A tertiary treatment system has been added to this facility. Disinfection removes pathogens from the wastewater by utilizing either chlorine or ultraviolet light. The facility includes an ultraviolet light disinfection system. This facility can use this type of recycled water or disinfected tertiary for irrigation of food crops, for human consumption, parks and schools, residual landscaping, and golf courses. And that would be irrigation of parks and schools. I will now briefly summarize the changes to the facility. It currently operates under Waste Discharge Requirements Order 5-01-254, which was adopted by this board in October 2001. Since then, the City of Fresno has invested substantial resources to upgrade the facility to its current state. In 2009, the facility's activated sludge treatment system was upgraded by adding one additional treatment train to increase the total number of activated sludge treatment trains from 2 to 3. In 2017, the City of Fresno completed Phase 1 of the disinfected tertiary treatment system at the facility, which has a design flow of 5 million gallons per day. At full build-out, the facility's disinfected tertiary treatment system will have a design flow of 30 million gallons per day. This will divert some of the effluent discharged to the on-site storage ponds and utilize it for other recycled water uses. The city is currently working on constructing a distribution system to convey disinfected tertiary recycled water to use areas within the city of Fresno. The text on this slide is difficult to read. However, the intent of the slide is to provide a broad overview of the city's of Fresno's planned distribution system for recycled water, which is identified by these dashed lines on the map, which will either be existing or proposed pipelines that convey the recycled water. The City of Fresno's 2008 Urban Water Management Plan established a goal to provide 25,000 acre-feet per year of recycled water for offset potable water uses by the year 2025. Due to the geographical size of the city, the master plan divided the city into 4 quadrants to evaluate reuse options and implementing the recycled water plan. The initial phase for the distribution system is to the southwest quadrant due to its proximity to the facility down in this area. The major uses in this quadrant are parks, cemeteries, schools, Highway 180 corridor, industrial and residential and commercial development. On March 20th, 2017, the City of Fresno was enrolled under the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Reclamation Requirements for Recycled Water Use Order for the reclamation of disinfected tertiary wastewater. This slide summarizes the major components of the tentative waste discharge requirements order in front of you today. It updates the WDRs to reflect the various changes the city has implemented at the site, including the addition of the disinfected tertiary treatment system. Accordingly, it includes the necessary recycled water requirements and ultraviolet light disinfection system operating specifications to ensure compliance with Title 22. Due to excessive use of the disposal ponds over the past decades, a substantial groundwater mound persists underneath the facility's property. A likely result of the extensive use of the ponds over the years is excessive organic loading. As a result, arsenic and manganese concentrations in select groundwater monitoring wells underlying and downgradient of the facility exceed the applicable primary and secondary maximum contaminant levels for arsenic and manganese, respectively. This order requires the city to evaluate the extent of the elevated arsenic and manganese concentrations and the potential impacts the concentrations are having on downgradient water supply wells. The tentative order authorizes a limited-term salinity exception in accordance with the salinity exception policy of the Tulare Lake Basin Plan. The City of Fresno, as part of their report of waste discharge, provided justification for the need for the salinity exception. The justification included implementing various salinity control measures such as Salt is Serious campaign, and discussed how the drought and water conservation impacts have caused salinity increases in their influent. As a result, this order includes a performance-based effluent limitation for electrical conductivity of 1,000 micromoles per centimeter as a 12-month rolling average. The City of Fresno has been extensively involved in the CV Salts program and is committed to continue involvement after the Basin Plan amendments, which were adopted by this board in May of 2018, are adopted by the State Board and the Office of Administrative Law. This concludes my presentation. At this time, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? The city in the past has, their wastewater, to the best of my knowledge, has been used quite extensively for irrigation. And to what extent will that water now be treated as part of the tertiary upgrade?
A majority of their effluent will be part of the disinfected tertiary system, which is covered under the new State Board recycled water use permit. There will be there'll be a fraction of it that will still be secondary disinfected that will be discharged to the existing facilities that already receive it. So it's just a matter of time when, you know, more of the facility will upgrade to the disinfected tertiary system. And as time allows, as more disinfected tertiary water is provided, it will be used for other purposes other than on-site disposal.
Because we have impacts from that facility seen as far away as Kermit. And I'm just, I'm very curious, quite frankly, to what extent that wastewater will be discharged that can add to that impact, and what measures may be taken in the future to mitigate the impact that has occurred in the past.
You want me to jump in, or?
Dr. Longley, Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in Fresno. Certainly, I mean, the decades of discharge of significant volumes of water at the Fresno wastewater treatment plant has created a problem that has included nitrates, arsenic, magnesium, you know, and certainly the goal here is that if a significant portion of the water can be recycled, diverted to landscape areas and other uses within the city of Fresno, it can remove water from that area where the mound has occurred, so we don't continue to exacerbate that problem and spread the water out. Certainly additional treatment will help with that, but the primary goal is to get the water spread out over a larger area so we don't concentrate those problems, to get the reducing conditions that cause the arsenic problems. We get more denitrification and additional treatment so that, you know, we don't have as many of these issues. The water can be used for more sources to relieve other uses of water, you know, as SGMA and some of these issues, as we recognize we need to be as conservative with our use of water as we can be, because we don't have enough of it. And that's our goal, is primarily to do that, because as you well know, with salts and issues of that nature, you know, active remediation of going in and fixing these problems that have occurred over decades is an almost impossible task to achieve. And so source control is the primary way to do that. As we move in with CV salts and we have the management plans, which certainly the city of Fresno is going to have to participate in, you know, we will have the alternative compliance options available to how we address some of the problems that have been created by this. So certainly it's a several-pronged effort to minimize additional exacerbation of that problem, to see that people that have been impacted, you know, that they don't continue to see those impacts. But it will take a significant amount of time for this problem to be resolved.
I thank you for that, and I am happy to see the city moving towards tertiary. It's a big step forward. I can't be happy when they're totally tertiary. They have very significant drawdown too, so putting that water back into areas where it can address the drawdown that's occurred under the city certainly will be yet another benefit. Gets us back, it gets us doing what cities in the Southland have been doing for decades now. But yeah, I think I see a lot of good things happening here, and of course my interest comes from being a resident of the city of Fresno, but also in fact in the past having worked on that system as a consultant before I came on this board. So very good. Thank you. Since we have no more questions, I'll go ahead and close the hearing and entertain any discussion with the board, but also I'm asking for a motion to adopt the waste discharge requirements.
I move to adopt the discharge requirements.
I'll second.
Marcus moved and Denise has seconded. Roll call.
Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Cordara? Pardon me, Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Ms. Cordara?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 19. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider renewal of the MPDS permit for the City of Lincoln wastewater treatment plant and reclamation facility in Placer County. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer, I do. Thank you. Designated parties are the City of Lincoln and Mr. Michael Garabedian. Total times allowed for testimony, cross-examination, and closing statements are as follows. City of Lincoln, 10 minutes. Mr. Garabedian, 3 minutes. All other persons are interested persons and shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No. We did receive a late comment letter that has been distributed to the board members from Jack Sanchez, and I believe he will be providing some testimony in today's hearing.
Very good. We'll now begin with a staff presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Elizabeth Thayer, and I'm an engineer in the Regional Board's Rancho Cordova office. I have taken the oath. This presentation is regarding the City of Lincoln wastewater treatment and reclamation facility and proposed NPDES permit renewal. The City of Lincoln is located approximately 30 miles northeast of Sacramento on Highway 65, off Interstate 80, and is represented on this map by the large red star. Oops, not finished yet. The Lincoln Wastewater Treatment and Reclamation Facility is a regional wastewater treatment facility in Placer County. The facility currently serves a population total of about 60,000, 17,000 in unincorporated Placer County and North Auburn, and 37,000, whoops, getting my numbers mixed, 43,000 in the City of Lincoln. Lincoln's facility discharges to a water of the United States a discharge which falls under the NPDES program. The National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES program, is a federal program that is administered by the state and regional boards. NPDES permits include the waste discharge requirements that protect the beneficial uses of the receiving streams. NPDES permits must be renewed every 5 years. As stated previously, Lincoln's facility is a regional plant. The regionalization is encouraged by the regional board, whereby smaller discharges merge into larger ones and eliminate the discharge to smaller creeks. In this case, the cities of Lincoln, Auburn, and Roseville, along with Placer County, have been working on a regionalization project for several years. The City of Lincoln Regional Facility is a key component of the regionalization project. Recently, this resulted in the elimination of a smaller wastewater treatment plant in North Auburn in 2016. Additional regionalization is planned for the future. This aerial photo shows Lincoln's entire wastewater treatment and reclamation facility. Note the amount of space devoted to on-site irrigation and storage. The facility discharges tertiary treated wastewater to Auburn Ravine Creek, but was designed to minimize discharge through irrigation and storage capabilities. Even though the discharger is permitted to discharge year-round, typically discharges to Auburn Ravine Creek only occur between the beginning of October and the end of May. Lincoln's treatment facility is a state-of-the-art tertiary treatment facility with nutrient removal, filtration, and UV disinfection. As stated before, to minimize and control the discharge, the facility includes on- and off-site irrigation capabilities and large storage basins. Storage of significant amounts of treated water may result in a short-term discharge volume that is greater than the flow into the facility. Current treatment capacity of the facility is 5.9 MGD. During the term of the proposed permit, the discharger is scheduled to complete Phase 1 improvements to the facility to increase treatment capacity to 7.1 MGD and may complete Phase 2 improvements to increase treatment capacity to 8.0 MGD. The discharge capacity of the facility is 25 MGD, which could occur during short periods when stored final effluent is discharged. The proposed permit does not allow for an increase in discharge. All treatment and discharge capacities discussed today were previously authorized by the regional board. As mentioned earlier, Auburn Ravine Creek is the receiving stream for the City of Lincoln. This photo shows the creek near the point of discharge. Auburn Ravine Creek supports the beneficial uses listed here. Of particular note, Auburn Ravine Creek supports migrating salmon and steelhead populations. As will be discussed in more detail later, the site-specific temperature requirements are proposed to protect salmonids. Comments on the proposed NPDES permit were received from the City of Lincoln, also known as the discharger, Mr. Michael Garabedian with Friends of the North Fork and Placer Group Sierra Club, Mr. Jack Sanchez with Save Auburn Ravine Salmon and Steelhead, or SARSIS, Mr. Scott Johnson with SARSIS, and Ms. Diana Suarez, a concerned citizen. All comments that were received have been addressed in the response to comments document. The following slides contain a summary of the comments received and the staff responses. The discharger commented that the antimony data used to evaluate the need for effluent limits was abnormally high and not representative of the discharge. The discharger commented that the laboratory results are questionable because the laboratory instrument had quality control issues on the date of analysis. In the summer of 2018, the discharger also conducted monthly antimony resampling with a more precise analytical method. No exceedances of antimony criteria occurred during the resampling. Staff concur with the discharger that the one high sample result for antimony is not representative and should not be considered when evaluating the need for antimony effluent limits. Antimony effluent limits are not required and have been removed from the proposed order before you today. As an introduction to our next topic, mass limits are calculated using the discharge flow volume and concentration. The discharger commented that the tentative permit should contain ammonia mass limits based on 25 mgd discharge flow capacity rather than the average flow rate of 8.4 mgd. Staff agree in part. The average weekly effluent limit was modified based on 25 mgd peak flow for short-term discharges. However, the average monthly effluent limit based on 8.4 mgd as an average dry weather flow was retained for long-term discharges. These loadings are consistent with the water quality analysis provided by the discharger. The discharger would need to provide a new analysis at the higher flow rate in order to recalculate the average monthly limit. Mr. Garabedian's comments will be addressed in the next few slides. The first topic is pretreatment. Federal regulations require that all discharges over 5 mgd have an industrial pretreatment program. Federal regulations also require that the industrial pretreatment program be approved by the regional board. Mr. Garabedian commented that the tentative permit does not specifically direct the discharger to prepare an industrial pretreatment program, allow for public input in the pretreatment process, or require an approval process by the regional board. In response, note that the tentative permit did include pretreatment requirements. However, board staff agree that a deadline for submittal of a pretreatment program should be required with the recent addition of the SMD1 plant flows. The proposed permit has been modified to require the discharger to submit a pretreatment program for board review within 1 year of permit adoption. The city is currently in the process of developing the pretreatment program, and public involvement will be included in both the dischargers and the regional board's adoption processes. The next topic of discussion involves a discharge prohibition. Mr. Garabedian commented that the following discharge prohibition constitutes an illegal discharge. He contends that there may be significant pollutant concentrations in cooling waters and condensates. Board staff note that the purpose of this discharge prohibition was to ensure that the discharger adequately maintains the sewer collection system. However, board staff agreed that this particular discharge prohibition is confusing and duplicative of standard provisions and the State Water Board's general waste discharge requirements for sanitary sewer systems. Staff responded by removing the discharge prohibition from the proposed permit to avoid confusion and duplicative requirements. Mr. Garabedian commented that removal of the mass limits for biochemical oxygen demand and total suspended solids may result in an increase in the mass of pollutants in the discharge. Staff do not agree. Mass limits for these compounds, BOD and TSS, in addition to concentration-based limits were included in the previous permit due to concerns about facility overloading. With the current high level of treatment, including tertiary filtration, the discharger has demonstrated that facility overloading is not an issue, and concentration limits alone will effectively control the discharge. The removal of the mass limits will not allow an increase in the discharge because the proposed permit continues the concentration limits and also includes limitations on flow. The next comment addressed in this presentation was from Mr. Sanchez, Mr. Johnson, and Ms. Suarez. They all commented that the discharge to Auburn Ravine Creek should not be permitted in order that wildlife, salmon, and steelhead may be protected. Port staff responds that the proposed order is fully protective of all the beneficial uses listed earlier, including aquatic life and wildlife beneficial uses, such as warm and cold freshwater habitat, migration and spawning, and wildlife habitat. The beneficial uses are protected through implementation of discharge-specific effluent limits, receiving water limits, discharge prohibitions, and monitoring of the effluent and the receiving water. Mr. Sanchez with Save Auburn Ravine Salmon and Steelhead also commented that SARSIS is concerned about temperature impacts to salmon and steelhead in Auburn Ravine Creek. At this point, it is important to provide some background regarding temperature in Auburn Ravine Creek. In order to protect aquatic life beneficial uses, the basin plan includes a temperature objective that discharges shall not increase the receiving water temperature by more than 5 degrees Fahrenheit at any time. The basin plan allows that appropriate averaging periods may be used for compliance with the temperature objective, provided beneficial uses are protected. In 1999, the city issued an environmental impact report for construction of its wastewater treatment and reclamation facility with discharge to Auburn Ravine Creek. The city was concerned that the discharge would not comply seasonally from 1 October to 31 May with the basin plan temperature objective. Discussions were started with staff of the Regional Board and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, or DFW. An outcome of the discussions was development of averaging periods to evaluate compliance with additional site-specific limits. The site-specific limits discussed would be equally protective of aquatic life beneficial uses as the basin plan temperature objective. DFW had concerns about protection of salmon and steelhead migration and spawning in Auburn Ravine Creek. DFW provided comments on the EIR that site-specific receiving water temperature limitations are needed. Based on the recommendations from DFW, the Regional Board adopted the 2001 NPDES permit with site-specific receiving water limits for temperature. This slide shows the text of the site-specific receiving water limits that are protective of aquatic life through limits on temperature and discharge time periods. The receiving water limit includes the 5-degree increase per the basin plan as an annual average, with additional numeric limits to protect salmon and steelhead. DFW recommended a monthly average and a weekly median temperature of 58 degrees to protect Chinook salmon and steelhead migration and spawning. A maximum temperature of 64 degrees was recommended as an upper level to protect juvenile salmon and steelhead from mortality. In 2013, there was another EIR issued for construction of the pipeline connecting Placer County's Sewer Maintenance District 1 wastewater treatment plant to the Lincoln facility. The EIR concluded that temperature increases due to the increased flow from Lincoln would result in less than significant impacts because of the site-specific temperature receiving water limits contained in the existing NPDES permit. Also in 2013, studies were completed by the discharger showing that the discharge could comply with the 5-degree temperature limit of the basin plan without extending the averaging period. Therefore, the discharger's application for NPDES permit renewal included a request to remove the site-specific temperature limits and replace them with limits based solely on the basin plan temperature objective. In the 2014 permit renewal, only the basin plan temperature objective was retained. This figure shows average monthly temperatures in Auburn Ravine Creek downstream of Lincoln's discharge during the discharge. The blue dots represent the average monthly temperatures of Auburn Ravine Creek downstream of the discharge when the facility was discharging. The horizontal orange line indicates 58 degrees, which is the site-specific monthly average receiving water limit from the 2001 and 2008 permits and recommended by DFW. The vertical green line indicates the effective date of the current 2014 NPDES permit. All data complies with the 5-degree basin plan temperature objective. However, note the data points to the right of the vertical line and above the horizontal line. After the site-specific receiving water limits were removed in March 2014, there are multiple occasions when the Auburn Ravine Creek temperature is over the 58-degree former limit while the facility was discharging. We would like to be clear here. We are not making the case that the discharger necessarily caused the creek to exceed 58 degrees. What we are showing here is that the basin plan temperature objective is not as stringent as the site-specific limits contained in the previous permits, because it is allowing the facility to discharge more frequently when the creek already has elevated temperature. Because the temperature of the discharge is always greater than the temperature in Auburn Ravine Creek, board staff are concerned that receiving water limits in the current permit are not adequately protective and are not consistent with the findings in the 2013 EIR. Board staff concur with Mr. Sanchez's concern and have reinstated the site-specific receiving water temperature limits that were developed with DFW's input. The city is currently looking into whether the city will be able to comply with the reinstated limits. If the discharger determines they can't comply, then board staff will work with them to develop a time schedule order to allow time to come into compliance with the limits. Or the city may conduct a temperature study of Auburn Ravine Creek to determine alternative site-specific receiving water temperature limits that are equally protective. The new alternative limits may then be presented to DFW and the regional board for incorporation into the next permit. In closure, we recommend adoption of the proposed NPDES permit. We would like to enter the staff presentation, the agenda package, and the case files for this facility into the record. This concludes the presentation, and we will be happy to answer any questions.
Any board questions regarding the presentation? Yes, Mark.
I'd just like to say I appreciate the staff's consideration of the comments on the temperature fluctuations and the adoption of the site-specific temperature. Just glancing through the letter from Mr. Sanchez, that seemed appropriate. I was curious why the temperature seemed to be highest in April on a couple of occasions. It seems like that would not be a typical month to have the highest temperature in the creek.
Could we go back to that graph? I thought April too, but then as I looked at it, I thought
Maybe
it was
I
October.
read that wrong.
It was April. It was right after that. In March, I guess, is when it went off. Yeah. But then look again, in April 17 also,
So,
in April of 16.
Dr.
So-
Long, sorry, I want to ask a quick question of staff. I believe that this was computed only on days they discharged to the creek, and so the data might not show the whole picture, and I just wanted to ask staff if that's the case.
Well, regardless, I have to concur with my fellow board member. I think that I am concerned about the temperature, and I'm glad to see that you included specific temperature limits in the permit and that you're working with Lincoln to resolve that issue. Any other questions or comments?
I noted here that, I like that staff takes the comments in a constructive way. And, as I read the package, I always write, this, we conceded here and this makes sense, or, partially conceded, or, defended holding the line because of this. And so I appreciate that. And I'm glad that people like Mr. Garabedian out there, catches things that might be confusing, and so we appreciate the comments, and I'm glad that staff takes it seriously. So thank you.
Very good. With that, Mr. Michael, we'll proceed to the next speaker. Mr. Michael Garab, or City of Lincoln, excuse me. City of Lincoln. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak from the city?
If you haven't taken the oath, Dr. Longley will administer it.
I will administer it. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Jennifer Hansen. I'm the Public Works Director with the City of Lincoln. Although we do appreciate the significant amount of work that board staff did on this particular permit renewal, and they were very accommodating with our concerns and walked us through them, we do have some concerns that we would like formally noted for the permanent record, and it is related to the temperature modifications. As noted in the chart that was shown, although it does show an apparent increase in temperature related to the effluent, what is not shown is what the temperature was of the upstream. So it does not substantiate that was actually related to the effluent discharge of the plant. Based on our conversations, though, we are committed to working with board staff to come up with a time implementation schedule for complying with these new regulations. But it should be noted that staff does have concern that there could be the potential that we will be having to decrease our discharges, which we do hear back from some of the environmental third-party groups that this could be of concern related to less water available for salmon migration during what we refer to as the shoulder months. So we would like the board to be aware of this issue. We are not saying that we are in disagreement with the proposed order, but we do hold those reservations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions of board members? Yes, go.
No, but I agree. I think that the background temperature upstream is going to be relevant to determine whether or not these are exceedances that are contributed or caused by City of Lincoln, or whether they're pre-existing from some other conditions. So I can, appreciate that concern, and I guess that hopefully the study that's done will bear that out. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Michael Garabedian, I believe Mr. Garabedian stated in a letter that he would not be available.
Yes, he did. He
he's
submitted
not
an
in the
email to the
audience,
board
so-
requesting that this date be moved.
Are there any other interested persons who would attempt to, yes, come forward, please. I don't believe you've taken the oath, sir.
I have not.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do.
I do.
Thank you.
I think you all have a text of my talk here, and I don't know. My name is Jack Sanchez.
Yes.
I'm the president and founder of Save Auburn Ravine Salmon and Steelhead. Very concerned about the salmon in Auburn Ravine. And I don't know how much of this you want me to go through. You have the text in front of you. Okay. Let me start. Tom Beatty, our attorney, was to be here, but he's very, very ill and had to be absented. My purpose is, like yours, is to focus on clarity of interpretation of the text to protect salmon and steelhead in Auburn Ravine. I have several individuals interpret this text, all of whom came up with different conclusions. And I'm a retired English teacher. I love poetry, but poetry ought not to be in a directive. The ambiguity is what I'm concerned about. I wish to work with you to eliminate ambiguities, and I want to collaborate every way we possibly can. But I also want salmon obviously protected, as you do, in Auburn Ravine. The annual existing text here has just been gone through. And then Josh Palmer, whom I worked with in great detail with many of your staff, also sent me an email that said, the discharge shall not cause the following in Auburn Ravine. Temperature, the annual average temperature to increase more than 5 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the ambient stream temperature, and shall not cause the receiving stream temperature to rise above, and then it goes into the ABC again. I'm still concerned about the 5-degree temperature range. That's death sentence for young salmon and sometimes adult salmon. Now, to continue, Josh says that now I admit the language is confusing, and then he gives a whole bunch of interpretations in great detail, which I appreciate, and goes through up to the bottom of page 2. The DFT, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife further commented, it is unclear from the described mitigation criteria what plant operations would be proposed in a year when ambient water temperatures in Auburn Ravine were relatively warm over an extended period of time. Regardless of monthly or seasonal fluctuations, the Department of Fish and Wildlife recommends that the 58-degree temperature criteria be utilized during the salmon run from October to May 31st period every year. And then other people, some law enforcement officers that I had read that had no idea how they were going to enforce that A, B, and C. Various people, I met with Gary Hanks, who's here today, and great help all the way along. He wants to do what he can do to protect salmon as well as the city of Lincoln. And with the existing text, if we go to the last page, skipping a lot of this because you have it, the above text is ambiguous and can be interpreted in multiple ways, which is unsatisfactory as a directive text. I have added the following to clarify and give specific directions for interpretation. And what I'm suggesting is that my last sentence here go into the text as it exists now at the end of ABC. The above data,
Trying to find out where you are on
okay,
this.
I'm on the page 4, the very end.
Last, on
Yeah,
page
I skipped most of it.
Okay.
Folks can read that. I don't want to
Okay.
take up your time.
Okay.
Okay, this is where it says this is added by Jack. This is what I'd like to see in the text itself. The above data ABC is to be construed unambiguously as, quote, Auburn Ravine temperature is to be maintained as close as possible to the target temperature of 58 degrees from October through May during the Chinook Fall Salmon Run each year, with infrequent rises of no more than 5-degree temperature June through September, the off-season for salmon. The young salmon will be growing up in that period. Anyway, I'd like you to add this to the current permit, if you will. And I want to thank you for your time and for allowing your staff to work with me extensively. I really appreciate it.
Could you stand up there, sir? Remain there for a minute. I'd like to have staff comment on the addition of this sentence. his recommendation.
Sure. This is Jim Marshall, supervising engineer in the Sacramento office, and I've taken the oath. So the limits that we have, the receiving water limits we have in there now are based on recommendations from Department of Fish and Wildlife to protect salmon, and they're set up with certain averaging periods that they allow some flexibility for discharge, but also at the same time are protective of salmon and steelhead. The original concerns back when the original EIR was developed and adopted by the city, the concerns were that the city couldn't meet the 5 degree on an instantaneous basis at all times. And so they came up, worked with DFW, allowed a longer period of time, give some flexibility on the temperature change, but then additional limits were added in that were specific for salmon and steelhead to protect them. So we think that the limits as they are clear. We've worked, we've talked.
Yes,
Yes,
but
I'm sorry?
they are not suggesting those limits be changed. What I'm hearing is they are concerned about it's not clear, it's ambiguous, and they.
Sure.
As I understand, what's being suggested is that
Exactly.
this sentence be added, not to change, but to take ambiguity out of the
So if I could.
interpretation. Yes,
Sure.
please.
Yeah, I think it's tough sometimes to translate the biological criteria that Department of Fish and Wildlife and our agency work towards into enforceable text. I think, and sometimes when that's done, when that translation is done, you wind up with something that is absolutely enforceable. We run our permits through the enforcement division to see which way they can or can't interpret that type of language. I think what is being proposed is actually quite clear. Mr. Sanchez, I appreciate your comments on the permit and your eye towards this. From my perspective, and I have worked on enforcement cases to enforce this permit language in the past, the problem with your language is actually the as close as possible and the with infrequent rises are both subjective terms. So as close as possible, somebody could say, hey, that's a 30-degree temperature swing. That's as close as possible. Or infrequent, to you it might mean something. To a different facility, it might mean something entirely different. So, I think the fact that staff are recommending temperature objectives that are, and you heard from the city, they're going to be tough to meet. And I think that they might absolutely require additional study. We're frankly putting the city under the gun to work with the fisheries agencies to come up, if they can't meet the limit, to figure out a way to work with the fishery agencies to absolutely protect the salmon. It is a very, very significant infrastructure investment to get your water cooled down from an effluent discharge, particularly for a regional facility, which we've been encouraging. So it's a complex question. I think the way that the permit term is written, it's enforceable. I think that tends to make the city a little uncomfortable. I think that's one of the reasons why you see him here. But we're working to partner with them. We'll certainly keep you and your organization involved in the conversation as we engage with the fisheries agencies and with the wildlife agencies to study this issue further. And frankly, the permit term is tough and enforceable the way we have it. Again, I think it behooves us as an agency to really try and be a little more proactive about explaining this is why it looks legal ease or regulatory ease when it's in a permit term. I can read what you put down here and say, that makes sense to me. As an attorney who's prosecuted those cases, that's where the defense attorney will say, hey, as close as possible to my client, sir. That is as close as possible, 30 degrees, and so you either have to go back and rewrite the permit or not
7 degrees
enforce it.
or 8
Yeah,
degrees,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
And that's the language that I had circled where it says as possible.
Yep.
If these were my clients, I'd say, well, we spend a reasonable amount of money and this is as close as we could get it, so we comply. So I agree. I think that even though it seems like this would clear it up, I don't think that it would. The other thing is, I know you said you talked to some law enforcement agencies and they said, how would we ever enforce this? And I don't think those are the people that would be out there checking it anyways, but, I know that staff is hard on this, and so I think that your input has been helpful, but,
It greatly
yeah,
improved the permit.
this language feels a little bit gray. I would totally take on this client. So-
Okay, let me respond. I appreciate your detailed response, but it does not eliminate the basic ambiguity in the statement that is in the permit itself. Your comments, your words are, to me, are not in the permit itself. You're saying, well, don't worry about it. You know, we know that the Fish and Game people know what they're doing, and our staff knows what they're doing. That's not in the permit. That's what you're telling us here in this meeting. If we need to revise my sentence, Ms. Ramirez, we certainly can revise the sentence to protect salmon. We're all here to protect salmon. And what we're going by is the written text of this permit. And that's why I'm here. That's why I came down from Auburn, my colleague in the hospital right now, and I'm still here because I want salmon to be protected. Gary Hengst had an email to me in which he said, you know, I would be willing, I think, Gary, if I'm not, he'll tell me if I'm misquoting him, that when the temperature during salmon run goes up above 58 degrees, he will stop the effluent into Auburn Ravine. Did you say that, Gary? Okay.
So
there has to be,
since we're on the record, we would have to swear folks and
Oh,
and
okay,
get 'em,
yeah.
and there's not really
Anyway,
room
he
for
did say that as far as
cross-examination.
I'm concerned.
Yeah,
yeah.
we are out of time for your testimony. The board can certainly give you more if
well,
it's their pleasure.
I'd like to go back and find this in the permit and
I think Adam has it queued up.
Yeah, can we just real quick? There's a couple things I think we need to walk through. Staff, could you pull up the figure that shows when this permit provision was in place and when it after it was removed from a future permit that you showed in your presentation? I think that's there's some just some real good evidence there that this provision does protect for the temperature range that we're looking to protect.
And it's slide 29.
Okay, thank you. And just, I think another bit of information that staff has worked very closely with our enforcement team in this office, and they've looked at this provision, and they have notified us that they feel this provision is very enforceable and clear to enforce. So, and this is...
But that's not the language. I'd like to see the language.
Oh, the language. Okay, yeah, pull the language up first. That's the one.
All right.
Do you want to read through it, or?
Well, my own judgment, second bullet, if you will, there 64 degrees at any time. That's a pretty absolute. I don't see an issue with that. The third one, 5 degrees Fahrenheit over ambient as a daily average. There's going to have to be some professional judgment on discharge on that. I find the first one, though, somewhat problematic. 58 degrees Fahrenheit on a monthly average and weekly median basis. A monthly average, and the 20th day of the month, you realize you're going to be over. I find that to be a little bit loose.
I think...
I mean, it's after the fact. Oh, my God, we busted it.
Well, I think that's a valid point. We have that with many of our limits and things, but I think one thing that we have to go back to here is this was worked out with Department of Fish and Wildlife to provide the facility enough flexibility to discharge and protect salmon at the same time. So I think, you know, certainly if we would go back with Department of Fish and Wildlife and ask these types of questions, we could get a more clear record of how that was considered. But I think for now, this is the best that we have as far as that goes.
You know, on the second bullet is the one I'm a little unclear on. If the basin plan goal was 58 degrees and the increase to the ambient temperature is targeted at 5 degrees, why does Fish and Game believe an increase to 64 degrees would be protective of salmon, which is a 6-degree increase? And I'm not a fisheries biologist, but I think even a short-term discharge at a 64-degree temperature could be lethal to spawning salmon. So that's the one I have questions about.
There we go. So again, I think you're absolutely right. This temperature objective is actually tougher than what's in the basin plan, because we have a temperature water quality objective, but we also have beneficial uses, and beneficial uses are linked to narrative objectives that say don't impact salmon, don't impact steelhead, or any species for that matter. And so this actually tightens up the objectives that are in the basin plan to protect the fish, and they were worked out with Department of Fish and Wildlife. So I think that's.
I don't know if ambiguous is the right word or not, but I see it as very difficult to operate with this kind of language, particularly the first bullet. And Mark brought up a good point about the second bullet. I just, to tell you quite frankly right now, I can't support this WDR with this language. I think it needs to be tightened up.
I agree. The 64-degree is a death sentence for salmon, as you pointed out, Mark. And that's why I was told we couldn't change this, because this is what he'd worked out with Department of Fish and Wildlife. So my interim step was to add this sentence that does have some subjective terms, but we could easily change those terms if you wanted to add that sentence. But what I'm concerned about is this is the existing law that your officers have to interpret, and it's ambiguous. In my judgment, and the judgment of everybody I've talked to, Adam, in law enforcement in Placer County.
Dr. Longley, I think what's important here, that at least that I think about when we look at temperature, it has to be, this is one of the very difficult limits to implement in receiving waters anyways, because you're always looking upstream. You're looking downstream of your discharge. You're also trying to figure out your discharge and how much you can discharge and things like that as a facility. But I think, where we need to, where at least staff looks at something like this, and whether or not it's ambiguous or not ambiguous, is we look for things like monthly average, because that's a number. We can quantify it, we can calculate it. And this has those things. The 64 degrees, this was based on some work, some site-specific work done by Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they're the experts on this. We're the experts on looking at a condition like this and saying, we're going to implement this, we're going to enforce it. We believe we can do that. I believe that in the next permit term, what we can do also, and I know the city's going to be committed to doing this, is looking at this and potentially looking at it again with Fish and Wildlife because of compliance issues they may have. In that sense, I feel like, I know that our staff can enforce this permit condition. And I know the city will do their best to comply with it. They've complied with it in the past. They're going to have more flow in the very near future. It's going to be more difficult for them. I think I would recommend that we move forward. We allow these conversations to occur. And staff will be watching these numbers as we move forward.
The other people we don't have here as part of this conversation today is Fish and Wildlife.
Well, one of the things I'd like to say is that I agree. I think that all the permits have, this thing that makes it hard or maybe makes it feel ambiguous for, you know, average citizens like me to, you know, out in the street to understand how this works. But the only way to make it unambiguous is to have a bright red line. But that's not really fair or reasonable as applied to the city of Lincoln either. So I think that what we're doing is we're saying, look, we'll try our best. You know, they'll try their best, and I know that doesn't help, you know, salmon if they're caught on a hot day plus this, but I don't, other than a red line, I don't know a way to do that, but I also don't think that's reasonable for the regional plant either. So I think that we have terms like this in lots of our permits, and I think that they are enforceable, if maybe not easily understandable, but enforceable.
Yeah, and I would add that this is not the sum total of the requirements for temperature. There's also components in terms of how the samples are to be taken. So whenever they're discharging the effluent, there is, correct me if I'm wrong, but daily grab samples taken. So there's no kind of, oh, I'm not going to take a sample today even though we're discharging. For the receiving water monitoring, it looks like the receiving water monitoring frequency is a minimum of 1 a week. So you're getting a data set sufficient to test these requirements when the facility is discharging. So I just want to bring that to the board's attention. It's more than just these subjective terms. There are other mandates as to when the samples will be taken, where the samples will be taken, how the samples will be taken in the many pages of the monitoring and reporting program as well. So that's usually the other thing that you're looking for when you have a compliance determination language, not just the limit, but how are you collecting the sample so that you're not using gimmicks to say, okay, I'm not going to take a sample because I know my water's coming out hot today. I am mandated to take a sample every day I'm discharging.
Okay, I'd like to say one final thing, if I might. I appreciate, Patrick, your analysis, but that's not part of the text of this permit.
It is, though. It's on page E5 of the monitoring and reporting program and E10 of the monitoring and reporting program.
Could you show me that, or? I mean, the ABC, is that what you're talking about? That's part of the permit. That's what we're trying to
No,
change.
that's the monitoring frequency that
okay,
governs
yeah.
the use of that.
And then secondly, I totally believe Gary, who told me that it's not in the text, but he said that whenever the water would come close to 58 degrees in their effluent, he would not discharge. I believe him, but that's not in the text.
Can you show us where that is in the monitoring, in the MRP?
It's on page E5 is the specifications for the effluent monitoring frequency. Page E10 is for the background receiving water monitoring frequency. And there's additional specifications on page E3 as to the receiving water and effluent monitoring locations.
You say D5,
E.
E5.
64 degrees. No, this is just how it, this is monitoring. Oh, it's just monitoring, okay.
That helps.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
So E3 is the locations. E5 is, if you look at the bottom of that chart, temperature. You're taking a grab sample every day. And then E10, temperature, and you're doing a grab sample every week.
And what is the term of this permit, Adam?
5 years.
5. Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is receiving, okay.
The other thing that operationally the city has to be doing is looking at every almost on whenever they need to discharge on a daily basis, what does the upstream look like, and how much what's the temperature of water, things like that. And I think what's important at this facility is they do have a lot of storage. It's going to be less so when they have more flows coming in, but they still have a lot of storage. Operationally, under the past permits, if Jim, if you guys could pull up the figure that shows us, they have complied with this temperature number. And it's under this permit provision that they did that, this very same provision that we haven't changed. You can see to the left of the blue line. So the numbers there show that this was unambiguously met very well since at least we looked at it here in this data set from 11 to 14.
And like many of our other significant dischargers, they are also doing acute and chronic toxicity testing on a regular basis during the permit term to make sure that actually tests looks like fathead minnows in this at a minimum. Other species may be included as well relative to their most sensitive species report that's going to need to be turned in by the city. So they are doing biologic indicator toxicity testing as well during the life of this permit.
And I note on page E6 that grab samples shall not be collected at the same time each day to give them some scatter as so far as time is concerned. Well, I must say that the MRP does provide clarity. I still have reservations, but there is a provision to work with the city of Lincoln. And if I do vote for this, I would like to have a report back on the temperature at a point in time and any other factors that may be deemed important at that.
I'd like to thank the staff for your input and help all the way along, and the board, I really thank you for your oversight. Thank you so much.
Well, I thank you for your concern, for your service for
Okay,
the
bye-bye.
Auburn Ravine. Thank you. Good. Any other interested persons wishing to testify? What's this? Oh. I have a card from Jennifer Hansen. That was me. That's you. You've already testified. Jack Sanchez. Eric Ziegler. Okay. Well, at this point in time, then, we're prepared for a closing statement from the city of Lincoln, if you would so like to make one.
We would just like to thank the board and the board staff for this opportunity to provide comment and to make just a final note that the temperature limitations, although they are doable, we will be working with board staff to develop a time schedule for implementation. We do foresee significant challenges in the future to meet these limitations, especially given the fact that we will be bringing on more flows. The facility was always contemplated to be a regional facility, and as board staff indicated, this is very good for the environment as well as the receiving water bodies associated with the discharge area. However, we do understand the concerns related to the temperature limitations and do plan on working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to further analyze those to determine what is appropriate, because there will be situations during this permit term where we will have to decrease our discharge to the receiving water body, which could in turn impact the salmon due to decreased water available. So I would like that noted, but we do appreciate your consideration, and thank you, board staff.
Thank you. The closing statement by staff and a recommendation by the executive officer.
No closing statement by staff.
Before I provide the recommendation, I do want to thank staff for their attention to the interests of both the City of Lincoln and the environmental groups that come before us. These are tough issues, and they're tough to translate in permit terms. I recommend that the board adopt the permit as proposed, with the commitment to update the board as we continue to engage with Fish and Wildlife on the applicability of these permit terms. I think that temperature will be something that you will continue to see in front of the board I think that's really for two reasons. One is you are going to see additional regionalization in all likelihood from a lot of these plants, which can increase the flows. And second, climate change looms very large on the horizon. It is changing the dynamics of our receiving waters and changing the dynamics of our flows and contributions to those waters. So we have in the triennial review, some of the CV salts issues are related to temperature. They are related to climate change and water conservation. It's going to be an issue that's going to come up before this board again. But again, my recommendation is to adopt the permit as proposed by staff. And I think we've got tough enforceable limits in there. And again, we're committed to telling you how our work with Fish and Wildlife is going to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll close the hearing and the board at this point will deliberate and we'll proceed to voting. I continue to have a concern about this plant. Let me preface this by saying that there's been a lot of work by this board and by the folks Lincoln and elsewhere to get a regional facility in place. And it was a real achievement. In fact, we do have a regional facility as opposed to a number of other smaller facilities that have very difficult times operating. So with that in mind, we need to make this thing work. And I have concerns about the temperature. As has been pointed out to us, these issues are issues not only here but elsewhere. And on a statement, though, that is supposed to be an operation, could be interpreted as an operational statement, and I'm talking about the monthly averages and all of that. Maybe we can place them some way in the text so it's not so ambiguous, but for operating purposes, we have to, I'd like to see clear statements on, at this point in time, the temperature shall not be more than, period. And I think that gives us a little clearer idea. This then should result in the averages that we're looking for. Other parts of this permit, I think, are well written. Certainly the toxicity provisions are quite extensive and I think will serve the water quality well. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm in support of what Dr. Longley just said in regards to the temperature and setting a not to exceed. I don't know legally where that stands, but to hear the issue of the temperature and potentially we're going to go exceed it and we're going to, so yeah, I would support a not to exceed. However you can give some consideration to that, I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, I would say that's what's in the permit. There's a red line in the permit. You take the permit samples, it exceeds that. If the average exceeds that number, you got a problem on your hands. That's the time schedule that the city was talking about asking for.
And it was just pointed out, 64 degrees, was it 64 degrees, is extremely high. I think that needs to be reevaluated. So if we do go ahead with this, I'd like you to come back with new language for us after you've worked with Lincoln and the Fish and Wildlife. And it would be handy to have somebody from Fish and Wildlife here.
I think what we're looking at right now, and those points over the exceedance line and things of that nature, what the city's asking for is a time schedule, because I think they envision problems meeting this permit limitation. They can do it, but there's probably going to be an exceedance here or there, and they're going to have to figure out what the response to those violations are. Again, in the permit, it's a red line. There's that even though there's a bit of an equation there, if that equation pencils out above those numbers, you've got a problem, and Fish and Wildlife says you have a problem. So they're going to come into the board asking for a time schedule order to put them on a compliance schedule to figure out what they're going to do, whether it's studies, whether it's infrastructure improvements or things like that. to get the water quality rectified. So,
Well, I stated earlier that
and we can
I
have
was
that in
quite
front.
alarmed that I wouldn't vote for those limits. I think in the MRP, as I should have gone back and looked at, it tends to put them a little more in context. I don't like the language, but you know, if this was a small plant, I'd say let's try to do it again and bring it back. But as I said, this is a regional facility. We worked hard to get this regional facility. We have to move this regional facility down the road, is my feelings.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I feel that, where I tend to lean is that we have people who have a history of being good actors, who have expressed their desire and their intent to be good community citizens. We've got citizens who care, who are engaged. And so this doesn't feel like the kind of situation where they're just waiting for us to take a vote so they can go, you know, do bad things. I don't think that's the situation. Plus, I think that we need, as a board member, I feel like I want to encourage regionalization the same way that has been expressed. And part of that means working with the bumps that come in consolidating systems, because you're balancing two risks. You have smaller operating plants when lots of small operating plants, and then if you lose an operator, then you have some problems. You've got high cost for the area, and so regionalization is a benefit, but it also comes with a lot more water and a lot more tricky components to it. So I think that, you know, I'm glad that we're watching this closely, but I intend to support this. I'm glad that for the regionalization, and I believe that there's enough eyeballs and that the hearts are all in the right place. So I think this is going to work. So with that, I would make a motion that we approve we approve as presented.
Are there any revisions with this? I didn't see any.
No late revisions.
So there's no late revisions
So
included in that
right.
motion.
So my motion would be that that the board adopt the NPDES permit as presented.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second that. I'd just like to add, I think, I understand, Patrick, that that the language has to be enforceable, and it seems like to me these provisions are enforceable. I agree with Chairman Longley that I'd like to see some additional reporting on your progress with discussions with Fish and Game. And, you know, looking at this chart again, there's semi-annual reporting in October and April every year. I'm sure there's a lot more data that isn't summarized on this graph. Mm-hmm. And I think that'd be beneficial given the salmon spawning season from October to May. I'd like to see more data, I guess, summarized next time we discuss this.
That's right. Upstream water temperature would be.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, so should the City of Lincoln ask for a time schedule order, those time schedule orders can be issued under delegated authority under my signature without necessarily having a hearing in front of the board. That's how a lot of them are done when we see there's not really controversial issues resolved around that. I think given all the things going on and given the board wanting to hear from Fish and Wildlife, if we've got a time schedule, I'm looking to Jim and to Adam, if we've got a time schedule request coming in from the City of Lincoln, I think it would be appropriate to have that conducted in a hearing before the board so we can hear the input from the public, and we can have the Department of Fish and Wildlife here to answer questions about the particular species concerns that might be in this watershed.
And since, as you pointed out, we have this issue and other permits, it might be good at this point. I'm glad you suggest bringing them in because it would allow us to develop a baseline with them that may serve us elsewhere.
And I'll second the motion based on that progress.
Thank you. Any further comments?
It's been a process, but that's how we get to the conclusion. So Carmen hit it when she said the regionalization, because that is key to what we're trying to do here. So based on the discussion that we've had, providing some information, charts on the upstream, and getting Fish and Wildlife in here so we have the full discussion to make, the best decisions. I'll also move forward with the
Thank you.
vote.
Roll call.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Cordaro?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Agenda item 20, how long is this one, Patrick?
I think the presentation was clocking in at about a half hour, is that correct? A little less than that.
We'll take a 10-minute break. Please be back here at 10 to 11.
Sounds good?
If you'd said 5 minutes, I'd said go.
Oh.
They're just parts of the policy.
We're back in session. Agenda item number 20. At this time, the board will hear an update on the State Water Board's enforcement policy. This is an information item only. No action will be taken, although the board may ask questions.
With our expertise and our staff, we're able to offer the regional boards a variety of services. Not only do we have the legal staff that represent your enforcement staff on significant water quality enforcement matters, we also, in our technical staff, have expertise that we can bring to bear in your region on a wide variety of water quality program areas, as well as inspection staff in some of the new program areas like the Cannabis Enforcement Unit. As the office has grown, we've also taken on a lot of the new program areas that have come to the state board since 2006, including not just cannabis, but drinking water and the Environmental Lab Accreditation Program. Both are represented in our office as well. Our mission at the Office of Enforcement is similar to and aligned with the regional board's missions and the state board's mission in that it is to promote the enforcement of water rights and water quality laws to ensure that violations are properly investigated, documented, enforced against, in accordance with the water board's policies to promote compliance, deter future violations, and protect water quality, water supply, and water availability for the benefit of the present and future generations. Our mission has a focus on consistency of enforcement, fairness, and transparency, and those goals are reflected in the water quality enforcement policy. A quick overview of the history of the enforcement policy. The Water Boards adopted its first enforcement policy in 2002. This policy created a detailed system for prioritizing violations and set up a basic framework for imposing or calculating liability under our enforcement statutes. This policy, however, provided to be fairly broad in that almost everything rose to the level of a priority, which makes it difficult to allocate limited resources. And it lacked a real workable mechanism for achieving consistent penalties. And a lot of times penalties were more difficult to nail down and define. Our office was then formed in 2006, as I had discussed. And in 2010, our office undertook a substantial overhaul of the enforcement policy, working collaboratively with the regional boards. We proposed and the state board adopted a more workable system for prioritizing violations. It had 3 categories of violations. And we set up a detailed methodology for considering the required statutory factors when determining civil liability against violators. And those are some of the things we'll be talking about a little bit more. In 2017, we did some fine-tuning to the policy. A majority of the tuning was clarifications of the 2010 policy and how it was intended to be implemented. But then there are additionally substantial changes and several procedural changes, which Mayumi will go into. Again, as background, the enforcement policy has some broad policy goals, and that's to protect and enhance the quality of the water of the state by defining an enforcement process that addresses water quality problems in the most efficient, effective, and consistent manner. So this idea of efficient, effective, and consistent is something that you see reflected in the water quality enforcement policy throughout. But one of the main concepts where you see this is in the concept of progressive enforcement. And you hear us talking about progressive enforcement a lot. And what that really boils down to is the concept of an escalating series of actions, starting from informal enforcement, such as a notice of violation, the whole way through to perhaps a complaint for administrative civil liability. And in the concept being that while we progress through those steps, it is an attempt to obtain compliance with the least amount of staff effort in the most effective and efficient manner. It also gives dischargers an opportunity to demonstrate a willingness to come into compliance voluntarily first before being subject to administrative civil penalties. While this is our typical course of action when we're doing enforcement, there are times when it's not appropriate to use such a progressive approach from informal to formal, and there are times when it is completely appropriate to take to go directly to a complaint for administrative civil liability. Those situations would include where you have an intentional bad actor or a grossly negligent bad actor. And you have to balance the other benefits of the policy or the other priorities of the policy, such as, we'll talk about some of those specific goals, such as establishing an even playing field, protecting or creating public confidence in our regulatory structure, deterring harmful conduct, future conduct, or just in identifying the greatest needs for enforcement. Those are all goals that the policy helps us work toward. I'm going to take some time. I'm going to talk broadly about the penalty methodology and why we have one, and then I'm going to go into the nitty-gritty of the penalty methodology because while the enforcement policy covers a lot of policy goals, a lot of the changes that we're going to be talking about later are specific to how that methodology is implemented. So I think it's a good background to provide you this overview of the methodology. So what the penalty methodology is, just generally speaking, is it's a framework. It's a framework by which your enforcement staff and ultimately the board can consider the statutory factors that we are required to consider prior to imposing civil liability on a violator. The intent behind the methodology is to create, again, a fair, consistent, and transparent statewide approach to how liability is imposed. So other goals, when we walk through this process, the methodology helps us make sure that whatever penalty we bring to you as a proposed penalty or penalty that you consider imposing has a reasonable relationship to the gravity of the violation, the harm to beneficial uses, the impact to the integrity of the regulatory program, and that it fully eliminates any economic or competitive advantage obtained from noncompliance and deters future violations, both for a specific violator and for the regulated community generally. I'm going to go back just one slide here. I wanted to talk just a little bit I talked about how the penalty methodology is a framework to consider statutory factors. You're going to hear these over and over again as I talk about the penalty methodology, so I just wanted to give you insight into where they come from. Water Code sections 13.327 and 13.385 identify some very specific factors that are to be considered when imposing a civil liability penalty. Those factors include nature, circumstance, extent, and gravity of the violation. And this is, specific statutory language, and you don't need to know it exactly, but I'm just going to kind of run through it because you'll hear me talk about it again when we talk about the steps in the methodology. We're to consider whether the discharge is susceptible to cleanup or abatement. We're to consider the degree of toxicity of the discharge, and with respect to the individual violators, we're to consider the ability of that violator to pay the proposed penalty amount, any voluntary cleanup efforts undertaken, any prior history of violations, the degree of culpability of that violator, and the economic benefit or savings, if any, resulting from the violation. And then at the end of our analysis, there's the step where there's still a lot of room for discretion, and that's other matters as justice may require. Because, we're complying with statutes, and they all like to have a lot of legalese and language. They throw in this catch-all at the end. So for you to consider other matters as justice may require. So again, I'm going to step through the penalty methodology twice before I turn it over to Mayumi to talk about some of the changes from the policy broadly and within the methodology. I'm going to step through it first without any numbers or hypotheticals, and then I'm going to step through it with a very broad hypothetical. And, board members who have been through the enforcement process and through an administrative civil liability proceeding have some familiarity with these numbers and how they can be adjusted and worked with. If this is your first introduction to it, it might be a lot to digest, and the Office of Enforcement is here for briefings and to talk to you in more detail. The policy has a lot more than just the sections that we're highlighting here today. So it's a much bigger document, but again, we're not getting into all of that today, but we're here to talk to you about it when you're interested. So the penalty methodology consists of 10 steps. The first 3 steps we have separated out as determining the initial liability amount. And the whole methodology can be divided between 2 types of violations. It can be divided between discharge violations and non-discharge violations. So you'll see here, step 1 through 3 is what you do to establish the initial liability amount. If you have a discharge violation, you're gonna look at different matrices or to come up with the initial violation amount than if you have a non-discharge violation. So the handout that I provided to the board members and the audience has some excerpts from the policy that are the actual tables, and they're just there so you can see what I mean when I say matrices. So if you look at table 1 and 2, those are the matrices we would use for a discharge violation. On the back side of the first page is table 3 for a non-discharge violation. And so what you look at in these steps is you look at the potential of harm from the violation, and then the deviation of the violation from the requirement. And those will give you a factor that you use to multiply against the maximum potential liability amount. Once you get through steps 1 through 3, you then come onto these other statutory factors that I referenced, and those are the discharger-specific factors. And what they do is they can modify or affect your initial liability amount when you start to consider things such as the violator's conduct and culpability, and past violations, history of past violations. Once you get your total base liability amount, and again, I'm going to do numbers next, so it'll make a little more sense, hopefully, when I start putting some numbers on it. This is just to kind of walk through the steps. When you move on to steps 6 through 10, this is where you take your total base liability amount, and then you check it against what we call adjustment factors that may impact your final liability amount. These are the ability to pay or continue in business. Other factors is just economic benefit, other factors as justice may require, and then step 9 is kind of a check back against the statute to make sure that the number you came up with is within between the maximum and minimal liability amounts that you have authority to impose under the statute that's being enforced. So just hypothetically, let's say we have a discharge of waste to waters of the United States that's occurred for over, let's say, 25 days. So if we take that violation, if we're dealing with a single discharge violation, and we run it through our methodology, we determine our potential for harm, our deviation from standard. And let's say staff here used a potential for harm of 7, a deviation of moderate, and they come up with the 0.27 factor using table 2. And apply it to your maximum potential liability, which is at $10,000 at 25 days. And that brings up that would give you an initial liability amount of $67,500. Moving on to steps 4 through 5, and considering discharger-specific factors and adjustments. In this example, staff assigned a factor for culpability of violation of 1.1, cleanup and cooperation of 1.2, and a history of violation, in this case, of 1.1. And the last page of your handout has kind of a narrative discussion of the violator's conduct factors and why staff may pick within the ranges available in those different factors. And that's something you can take a look at. But using those factors that we've identified, that would take your initial liability amount and multiply it, and you would get a base liability amount of just over $98,000 in this case. From here, staff can consider final liability adjustment factors, and those would include ability to pay, economic benefit, and other factors as justice may require. In this case, staff determined that the discharger has an ability to pay the proposed penalty of the 98,000, and that the amount equates to more than the calculated economic benefit. So in step 7, we'd look at economic benefit plus 10%, because that's what the policy calls out as what you should be obtaining from imposing a civil liability. Here, they determined assuming they determined that was met and it was adequately accounts for staff costs and the development of this enforcement action, and that it was within the minimum and maximum liability amounts. So there was no further adjustment to that 98,010 final, and we would use that as a final liability. So that was kind of a quick overview and stepping through with a very broad hypothetical to just kind of give you a reminder, a refresher, or an introduction to how the penalty methodology works within the framework of the policy. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mayumi so she can talk about what are updates to the enforcement policy, what changes we've made to that methodology, and a few other areas of the policy.
Thanks, Yvonne. Good morning, Dr. Longley and board members. My name is Mayumi Okamoto. I am a senior attorney in the State Water Board's Office of Enforcement. I'm also one of 3 attorney liaisons in our office who are assigned to Region 5. So what that means essentially is that I work with your enforcement staff early on in case development or help answer any legal questions that they may have from an enforcement perspective prior to that case being assigned formally to an attorney in our office. So as Yvonne mentioned, I'll be providing you with a summary of significant changes in the 2017 policy. And I'll demonstrate the ways in which the 2017 policy differs from the 2010 policy through the use of more concrete examples. So if you do have any questions as I'm going through it, please don't hesitate to ask them. I'm hoping that this can be kind of more conversational. So.
Okay, well, before you start, I do have a
Yes.
question. So, I was just waiting for you to take a breath so I could jump in. So as you're developing this, the changes, were you in consultation with the regional staff that you serve, or how did your office update the policy?
Yeah, good. Do you want
Yeah, the policy amendment process there were internal opportunities to review drafts and brainstorm on potential changes. There were multiple red lines circulated even before it went public. And then there were public workshops leading up to the final presentation of the policy to the state board and prior to adoption.
Yeah, and I'd add that Andrew Altevogt was point person for a lot of those comments. He interfaces quite a bit with the Office of Enforcement as head of the board's prosecution units, and Kim Sellards does a bit of that as well.
Okay. So one aspect of the 2017 update to the policy was to provide clarifications to some of the terminology that's used throughout the policy. So for example, the 2017 policy clarifies that the term fairness or fair enforcement relates to ensuring that no competitive economic advantage is attained by dischargers because of their noncompliance. The principle of transparency was added to ensure that findings in enforcement orders are supported by specific evidence and policy considerations. And finally, the term consistency relates to the application of the penalty methodology itself and not necessarily comparing the results of other enforcement actions within your region or other enforcement actions statewide. And finally, the 2017 policy also emphasizes prioritizing enforcement actions that may affect environmental justice communities or violations that may threaten drinking water sources and the human right to water. Perhaps the most significant changes to the actual policy are to the penalty methodology, as Yvonne mentioned, so to the 10-step process that Yvonne walked you through. So first, under step 1, potential for harm. So previously, under the 2010 policy, staff considered potential for harm to beneficial uses first, toxicity of the discharge second, and then susceptibility to cleanup third. So the 2017 policy kind of swaps those first two factors. So staff now looks at toxicity of the discharge first, potential harm to beneficial uses second, and susceptibility remains in the third position. Additionally, the 2017 policy clarifies that potential harm can be used if actual harm cannot be quantified due to, let's say untimely reporting or inadequate monitoring or some other type of practical limitation. Finally, the 2017 policy redefines susceptibility to cleanup by determining whether 50% or more of what was discharged was actually cleaned up within a reasonable period of time. Okay. The 2017 policy also adjusts the factors in tables 1 and 2, mostly regarding the factors assigned under column number 7. The effect of these adjustments results in a what we call a smoothing out of the curve between factors 7 and 8, and I'll show you some graphs in the next couple of slides. So this slide depicts tables 1 and 2 on the previous slide that I just showed you in graph form to demonstrate what the curve looked like under the 2017 policy. So does this show up? Oh, wait. Okay, there we go. So the bottom horizontal axis is the total potential for harm score from step 1. And then the vertical axis represents the adjustment factor. So the 3 dotted lines represent the different levels of the deviation from the requirement. So it's either minor, which is the light blue, moderate, or major. So the difference between a potential for harm score of 7 and 8 is depicted in the red circle. The change in the per gallon per day adjustment factor was addressed in the 2017 policy. So here you see a potential for harm score of 7 with a minor deviation versus a potential for harm score of 8 with a minor deviation. So same thing here, potential for harm score of 7 with a moderate deviation, potential for harm score of 8 with a moderate deviation. And then finally, potential for harm score of 7 with a major deviation versus a potential for harm score of 8. So you can see this significant jump between these two factors in the red circle.
So just briefly, I want to mention that this is one of the things that the regional boards really brought to our attention because this jump, you see it here just as in the table 1 to 2, but what it results in at the end of the calculation is a significant jump in liability.
For those of you who are on the board for some of these hearings, there were a lot. I can count at least 3 hearings where there was a extensive discussion of, no, I'm a 7, not an 8.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
7 or 6, or somebody saying, no, well, why don't we just change it to an 8? And people are like, no, that changes everything.
Yes.
All of a sudden, it doubles our penalty. So, and I think that the 2010 was a big step forward in getting some metrics around it. But this was one of the things that we started noticing when we were implementing it.
And I'll show an example too of what Patrick is talking about in 2 more slides. Okay. So now the changes in the 2017 policy are depicted as the solid lines. And I apologize for the way the key is reading, and there's a parenthetical that says draft. I could not figure out the PowerPoint to get it to say 2017 and not draft, so I apologize. It should say 2017. Most points on the per gallon or per day adjustment factors stayed the same. Of the points or per gallon or per day adjustment factors that did move on the graph, most were moved up to close that large gap between factors 7 and 8 depicted in the red circle to smooth out the curve. So again, the focus really was, where did the pointer go? Hello? Oh, here it is. So the focus really was on mostly under factor 7. So you see here, factor 7 was moved up in the 2017 policy, and again for moderate moved up, again for major moved up. So taking the hypothetical situation that Yvonne used previously, the bottom table depicts a comparison between the 2010 and 2017 policies regarding the differences between assigning a score of 7 or 8 for potential for harm. So in 2010, the initial liability for a discharge violation lasting for a period of 25 days differs significantly depending upon whether a potential for harm score of factor 7 or 8 is ultimately chosen. So here in 2010, you can see when a potential for harm score of 7 is assigned with a moderate deviation, it results in initial liability of $50,000. And should a potential for harm score of 8 be chosen instead, it doubles the initial liability amount. Under the 2017 policy, because of the adjustments that were made to the factors under column 7, the significant jump in the initial liability amount has been gradually smoothed out. So here in 2017, a potential for harm score of 7 with a moderate deviation is now $67,500, with a potential harm score of 8 and a moderate deviation remaining at $100,000. Another significant change in the 2017 policy addressed high volume discharges. The update removed the 2010 limitation of applying a high volume per gallon amount for sewage and stormwater only. The update allows a reduction to apply to any high volume discharge. Additionally, clarifications were added to define what we mean by a high volume discharge. So it's defined to be between 100,000 and 2 million gallons, whereas before the policy, the 2010 policy didn't have a definition. For discharges in excess of 2 million gallons, or for discharges of recycled water, a per gallon penalty of $1 per gallon may be used. And so previously in the 2010 policy, a $1 per gallon amount could only be used if it was a discharge of recycled water. So here there's a little bit more flexibility under the 2017 policy. The 2010 policy created a presumption of a $2 per gallon maximum liability for high volume discharges of sewage and stormwater. However, the 2017 policy provides the regional boards with additional discretion in determining the maximum per gallon liability between a range of $2 and $10 per gallon.
It addresses high volume, the change there. And so if you have a discharge greater than 2 million gallons.
If you have a discharge of, I'm sorry?
Greater than 2 million gallons.
Greater than 2 million gallons, then you are able to use the $1 per gallon factor versus, because it's larger than 2 million.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. That the $1 per gallon prior was only for recycled water discharges, but now any type of high volume discharge that's over 2 million gallons is eligible for a $1 per gallon.
Is it $1 per gallon over the 2 million?
No, it's $1 per gallon for the 2 million.
Oh, okay. So the difference could be that I had 1.9 million, and then I'm stuck in that column, in that one.
That's correct.
Or I could just let it go until I'm just over 2 million.
Yeah, see, and that was actually, that was a lot of the arguments that we heard prior to making this change, before, when we didn't necessarily have a high volume amount defined. People would say, well, I'm going to get a benefit if I just keep letting this volume go. I get less of a per gallon penalty. So I'm just going to let it go, right? And go ahead.
I think the hope is, with the additional discretion to decide between 1, 2, or 10, that the board can take culpability into consideration. And if there's an indication that they could have stopped it sooner, then maybe they wouldn't get the $1 per gallon.
And if I could just add,
This is something that certainly during settlement negotiations and things leading up to bringing an ACL to the board or coming to a settlement, there was a lot of argument back and forth with dischargers of, is it a high volume? Is it not a high volume? And this really allows us to say, yes, it is, or no, it isn't, and we can just kind of move on then. And then we can talk about what the dollar value should be, but there's no argument about whether it's high volume or not.
Okay. So regarding step 4 in the policy, the discharger specific factors, the 2017 policy slightly modified the culpability and history of violation factors. So specifically for culpability, it increased the multiplier in the range of it increased the minimum multiplier in the range of multipliers from 0.5 to 0.75, making the range from 0.75 to 1.5 for culpability. Additionally, the 2017 policy clarifies that assigning a multiplier of less than a neutral factor of 1 for culpability means that the discharger demonstrated to the board that it exceeded the standard of care expected of a reasonably prudent person to prevent that violation. Clarifications to the history of violation factor were added to specify that reductions below a neutral factor of 1 should not occur, even where a discharger lacks a history of violation. Prior history of violations occurring within the last 5 years should be assessed a factor of 1.1, and a history of similar or a number of dissimilar violations within the last 5 years should potentially receive a factor higher than 1.1. The 2017 policy also modified the manner in which multiple days of violation are collapsed. So what do we mean when we say collapsing days? It refers to a modification to the total number of days of violation based on a ratio outlined in the enforcement policy. Collapsing days is a consideration when determining the total base liability during steps 4 and 5, and can be a useful consideration in scenarios that involve ongoing violations resulting in significant liability. So for example, staff may consider collapsing the number of days of violation for a small dairy or a small grower with a number of missing annual reports, because without that collapsing of days, the penalty amount has the capability of being pretty significant. The 2017 policy changed the method of collapsing days so that violation days 30 through 60 are collapsed by a ratio of 5 days to 1 rather than 30 to 1. It also clarifies that this suggested method of collapsing days is intended to set the maximum permitted ratio when one of the findings below is made as the justification to collapse days. A regional board may decline to collapse days or collapse days in a different interval that is between the maximum suggested ratio and the actual number of days of violation. Furthermore, the 2017 policy clarifies that violations that delay remedial action, so for example, the failure to submit a corrective action plan required by a cleanup and abatement order, or the failure to submit, let's say, a technical report that delineates the vertical or lateral extent of a plume, that those are not the types of violations that may ordinarily be collapsed. However, should a regional board exercise its discretion and make findings that collapsing the number of days of violation is appropriate for that specific scenario, the most likely finding to justify that determination would most likely be under justification B, which is no discrete daily economic benefit. It would be pretty difficult, I think, to make finding A in those scenarios that it's not causing daily detrimental impacts to the environment or regulatory program, and as well as that it occurred without the knowledge or control of the violator. This table compares the 2010 and 2017 policies regarding the maximum suggested method of collapsing days of violation. The number of collapse days varies significantly under the two policies because of the adjustment in the ratio from 30-1 to 5-1 during days 30 through 60. So why did we recommend these changes to the 2010 policy? Prior to making these changes, we noticed that the 2010 policy resulted in disproportionate liabilities when collapsing days for violations lasting more than 30 days versus those lasting fewer than 30 days. The change in the ratio adjusts those proportions as depicted in this table. For example, where a discharger fails to submit an annual report for a period of 42 days, under the 2010 policy in the left-hand column, this would result in 7 days of violation. But that same type of violation that lasted for only 15 days is not eligible to be collapsed and therefore resulted in a larger liability despite having been shorter in duration. So the adjustment to the ratio in the 2017 policy corrects this phenomenon. And the effect of this adjustment in the 2017 policy results in liabilities that will be higher than those liabilities that were assessed under the 2010 policy when those days of violation are collapsed. However, the boards may continue to exercise their discretion under other factors as justice may require to lower the liability if the board feels that's warranted. So there is a recognition that, administrative civil liabilities, when they are collapsed under this new ratio, they will result in higher penalties. But, if the board chooses to exercise its discretion and still feels that penalty may be too high, those additional findings to mitigate that penalty may be made under other factors. Okay. So finally, the last significant change is to step 8 of the methodology, and that relates to staff costs. The 2017 policy clarifies that staff costs should be based on each staff's hourly rate by classification, including benefits and overhead. From the time the staff discovers an alleged violation, all the way up until an ACL complaint is issued. The Office of Enforcement has worked with the Division of Administrative Services to come up with a billing spreadsheet to assist when determining staff costs. Attorney costs and the costs associated with preparing for and attending a hearing should not be included in this calculation.
So I don't know when it occurred, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we were then told that we could not include staff costs in the ACL. With this, can we begin again to including recovering some staff costs?
Yes, so the changes, and Patrick can elaborate on this as well, the changes that were made in the 2017 policy do account for relevant case law that, has taken place since the 2010 policy was adopted. So yes, this is an accurate reflection of what the current state of the law is on staff costs.
And I think we're consistent with the Office of Enforcement. We can't directly recover staff costs, but it's a consideration that can be made. And so I think it's a fine point on that. I think when the danger is you walk into an enforcement hearing saying, well, whether or not this is a great enforcement case, we need to finance our enforcement staff and get a big ACL. That's the line that we absolutely can't cross. So we can take staff costs into consideration and say, well, wait a second, we've got this penalty amount. We walk through the penalty methodology calculator, and oh, by the way, here's how much it costs staff to run around to try and bring this person into compliance. That's absolutely a consideration we could make. We've pretty much always been able to make that. It's a question of the accounting standards are pretty high, so we don't necessarily do that with all of our cases. But where it's relevant and when we know it's going to be relevant to the discussion in front of the board, Andrew's working on methods to track those staff costs.
You say the accounting costs are going to be high. What do you mean by that?
It takes a lot of resources for staff to accurately time the intervals of time that they spend working on a particular case, and you have to be careful. I mean, if it's something that the board's going to consider, it has to be that something that an amount of hours that the staff can accurately attest to. I know for the attorneys on the board, or folks who have worked in the consulting realm, maybe it can come as second nature to keep very accurate logs of what you spent time on, and down to 10-minute, half-hour intervals, depending on what the job cost is. For a lot of the water board employees, while they absolutely try to work on things as expeditiously as possible, the time accounting usually doesn't loom large. So it's kind of a mental shift to really try and account for everything that you spent on the case. And every once in a while, it turns into a gray area because, well, I'm working on a template, and but I'm going to use it in this case. Am I going to, and so am I going to charge that time? So sometimes it's you have to actually, in addition to running the clock pretty regularly, you have to apply some discretion, talk to your colleagues. So there's a significant amount of staff time used in generating that accounting.
So the initiation of the action, you pretty much have to make that decision.
Yeah,
of whether or not
absolutely.
you're going to consider it.
Absolutely.
It's
Just
not
to-
something you can do retroactively.
It actually seems like it starts a lot earlier, because if this is going back to when the violation is first considered, that means that,
Yeah.
as an employee, I'm just like, I don't know if this is gonna settle, if it's gonna go all the way to, a contested hearing, but I better start logging my time now. It seems like,
Yeah. No, you're
really hard.
You're absolutely right, and the with the progressive enforcement, you have to realize, and this is kind of, I know my predecessor's direction was to not count this, because we only really see the tip of the iceberg in terms of a contested ACL before the board. So if we're only seeing a small percentage, 5, 7, 10% of the cases at most, that means there's a lot of staff logging a lot of time, spending a lot of hours doing that logging that will never be relevant to a discussion in front of the board. Again, I think there are circumstances where the enforcement nature is pretty egregious. You see a giant spill, let's start logging our time on this one. Let's really, because this is going to go to the board. This is bad.
I can think of a
So-
few cases where we haven't charged, where I would have loved to.
Yeah.
So I would like to speak to that just a little bit. I mean, it is ultimately the regional board's choice on how they want to handle it. But as Patrick pointed out, this isn't an additive factor. We're not recovering staff costs, so we're not developing a penalty and then adding staff costs, and we're not getting that money that goes back into any sort of enforcement funding. With that in mind, we do feel that it's a good indicator to the board of the amount of time and effort that went into obtaining compliance. And with that in mind, when we do work with regions who have been traditionally collecting staff costs, we don't do it on a 10-minute billing. We don't track it the way you would as a law firm billing. But what we do is we will tell the board we took into consideration the time it took starting from wherever we started with the issuance of the NOV, and we will provide justifiable staff costs, which ultimately is going to mean that it's probably an underestimation of staff time that went into every minute detail of that particular or specific case, but it will be representative of the amount of effort that went into a case. And I would say, and I say that you can do this. You can do it retrospectively. You can look back at your appointments and your meetings and your time, and you can sign an affidavit that said, I spent at least 20x hours. And then the justifiable part, the issue where we stopped doing it before was it, in part in response to a audit which said you guys don't really know what your staff costs are. And we've worked closely with the Department of Administrative Services to identify what our loaded staff costs are for each classification. Whereas before we were using like a very general, like 150 an hour, because that was like an average that the cleanup fund used. Now we have a very detailed breakdown, and we do go further to break it down, but we don't go as far as trying like what you would do if you were recovering staff costs directly. It's more an indicator of effort and time spent on an enforcement action.
And I know, you know, it tends to be particularly relevant, believe it or not, at least in my experience, with some of the smaller value ACLs, you know, and of course the board has to resist the temptation to kind of say, wow, they spent a lot of time, let's jack the cost up on this thing. But you know, some of the non-filer cases, the more tricky non-filer cases we have, say in the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, where you look at the record that was submitted to the regional board, and it has 50 phone calls and letters that went to a grower, that staff cost is going to be extraordinarily high. And if it's, you know, we've had cases where, hey, it's a wild rice grower or a pasture, you know, grower where they're just growing grass and using some irrigation practices and making a few $1,000s off of this. It is relevant to the board's discussion in those cases. You know, hey, we spent 20 grand worth of staff time, and they're only, you know, they're mowing a few $1,000s of hay off of that acreage. So it's something that we're thinking about. We all, for what it's worth, we also are thinking about better ways of accounting for staff time as we work on permits. So hopefully we can use some of that information to inform how we account for staff costs in enforcement cases. I imagine that you're going to see more of a discussion as we move forward as to what the staff expenditure is in terms of hours and staff time as we move forward.
Just one last slide, and then we will wrap up. There may be administrative civil liability matters that come before you that actually apply the 2010 policy versus the 2017 policy. So how do we know which policy to apply given the specific case? So prior to the October 5th, 2017 Office of Administrative Law approval, we drafted a publicly available memorandum to help guide staff and the regulated public on which policy will apply. The general rule is that the version of the policy in effect at the time the violation occurred controls. However, because there's always a however, in situations where violations begin prior to the October 5th, 2017 approval date, but end or continue past that time, the 2017 policy may be applied to the violation as long as the last act or the last triggering event occurred after the policy's effective date of October 5th, 2017. Furthermore, amendments in the 2017 policy that are considered to be clarifications, so clarifications to terminology that I reviewed with you earlier, those may be used to interpret the 2010 policy. But amendments that are more substantive, like the ones that we reviewed regarding high volume discharges or the collapsing of days, those are to be applied prospectively only from the date of the policy's effective date, October 5, 2017. So with that, we're happy to answer any additional questions that you may have.
Well, first of all, interesting clarifications. I can't look forward to the next ACL so we can see how we can apply them. No,
And it's two of
us. Seriously, I think it'll help the conversation, aid the conversation tremendously. Any further comments?
I have a question. On your slide where you discuss what fairness is going to mean, it almost sounds like it's similar to the economic benefit analysis. So is fairness now a term that's used instead of economic benefit? Or because economic benefit is that plus 10%, right? That's different. But fairness is now economic benefit?
Yeah, you want to? I can give it a try. I mean, I think that we're trying to clarify. I think that the term fairness, really represents the evening of the playing field, right? And the evening of the playing field means that certain people who spend a lot of money to comply with our regulations shouldn't be put at an economic disadvantage by those who don't spend the money to comply with our regulations. So it really is this concept of evening that playing field, recognizing and acknowledging, it's hard work and it takes money to comply with our regulations, and that other people that may not be putting in that work or spending that money, shouldn't be gaining gaining an economic advantages because of that.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that it's the same as the economic benefit portion of the analysis, but I think what the new definition does is it's a reminder that it's fairness in the context of the regulatory structure, not fairness in the context of the individual, in the sense that it's not equitable factors for that individual. Is it fair that we hold that individual to the same standard we're holding to the rest of the permitted or regulated community? So it's fairness across the board.
All right, well, that's a good distinction. Does the Office of Enforcement do litigation in court? Like, do you do that?
We certainly are involved in representing the regional boards and the state board in civil actions. We're represented by the Attorney General's office. We refer cases, and you've probably been involved in referrals to the Attorney General's office. But we do work with the Attorney General or the District Attorney, depending on the type of violation we're prosecuting. But if it's a water code violation, it would be working with the Attorney General's office.
So, and that was my next question. So the structure is we have staff at the regional level, at this level. And then there's Office of Enforcement, and then it's the Attorney General's office. Is that the way that it progresses through the system?
Specifically, when you take an enforcement case and refer it to the Attorney General's office, is that what you're kind of getting at?
I'm trying to understand
the hierarchy,
the hierarchy, or at least the path that cases go through.
So we're your attorneys and we represent your enforcement staff in proceedings before you. If you choose to refer a specific enforcement action to the Attorney General's office for prosecution, we then work collaboratively with the AG's office, and we could use your staff, or depending on the needs of the case, if it's a particularly large case with, let's say, onerous discovery, we then can pull in our own staff to assist with the actual case logistics. Some of our technical units, like our Special Investigations Unit or our Cannabis Unit, can investigate and develop cases within your region, where we would be working with your regional board management on those cases, letting them know that we're here working. Sometimes we'll bring your technical staff with us, kind of depending. So we have hybrid cases that are staffed both by our state board Office of Enforcement technical staff and your regional board staff. We have some that are staffed just by our state board staff, technical staff, and develop them and working and go forward. So there's a multiple paths. What usually happens is that our staff is often involved or called in if there is a particularly acute problem that maybe state board staff doesn't have the time to get to, but they want it addressed. So they'll ask for our assistance to investigate or develop. Or if there's a case that crosses multiple region boundaries that needs investigated, sometimes we'll come in and do that. So there's kind of the ability to be flexible depending on the case.
And so who initiates settlement discussions? Is it our office? Is it your office? And what's the policy? How does that start?
If it's an administrative case that we're bringing before you, your enforcement staff can initiate settlement discussions, and often those settlement discussions happen before we would get to an administrative civil liability complaint. And again, there are different processes and procedures in different program areas, but we have the capability, and we'll issue what we call a pre-issuance complaint, and that will just basically let the discharger or the potential discharger know what we're alleging and how we're applying the methodology to their particular set of facts, and then we'll initiate and begin that settlement discussion. And those discussions often happen on an administrative basis before you'll see a complaint come before you. If it is a referral case, it would generally be initiated from the AG's office as our representatives with the opposing party. And then there's opportunity to get feedback or involve or engage your management, and even sometimes, depending on the referral, the board with updates of what those settlement discussions are. So when you have a referral, and Patrick can feel free to jump in if he disagrees with me, when you have a referral, that the separation of functions isn't as clear because now you're represented as the board, as the AG's office, and you're not the decision-making body. So you can be briefed on those settlement discussions more regularly and kind of understand what's going on.
I totally agree. It has to be it's like a snowball. You're just picking up staff and attorneys as it's heading towards litigation.
All right, that's all I have.
Any further questions or comments?
I feel more comfortable with the changes here. I mean, the farm evaluations is what kept sticking in my mind as one of the issues, and balancing that out with a person that had, not turned in a report versus a violation of discharging and so forth, and we were trying to figure out, and they were getting charged more than, so I think you made some adjustments here that are good, and then with the version versus 2010, 2017, and how you apply that, I feel more comfortable with.
Yeah,
Glad we had the discussion today.
I think it was a really good learning experience for us. I think our experience using and applying the 2010 policy, really identifying what was working, what needed some fine tuning. So, we were hoping to make those improvements in this version.
It was frustrating at a point, but much improved.
Yeah, I agree. I think, even though I said I had nothing else to say, I agree, because what we don't want to do is come up with the number at the end and try to justify it after. And, and that's not appropriate, and we really fight that. But because the numbers didn't seem to progress the way it felt that they should, we were sometimes stuck with picking a bad decision or an ugly decision. And so now with these updates, it feels better. So, yeah, thank you.
And since I'm new to the board, I'd just like to thank you for doing this, and I don't have to worry about the 2010 version at all. I appreciate that. I imagine there will be a lot of arm wrestling about the potential for harm of 6 or 7 and 8, but it seems like a very good template. Thanks.
And just from a logistics perspective, we couldn't really work it into the PowerPoint, but we do have a pretty workable Excel spreadsheet that applies this methodology. And when an enforcement case comes before you, you have the same spreadsheet. It's publicly available on the website, and you can actually plug in those numbers and play with them, and you can see the impact that they have on a specific fact, circumstance, and it's not as difficult to visualize once you get into that spreadsheet and start working with it.
Well, thank you very much. Any further comment? If not, I'm getting ready to adjourn this meeting. Before I adjourn this meeting, I made a rather clumsy comment yesterday. I've been called to task for it. I referred to overflying the foothills, the many homes that I saw down there as lice on the back of a dog. And I've been brought to task for that. So I retract my comment. They're more like this sparkling stars in the sky that you gaze on at night. Is that okay, Debbie? Okay, thank you very much. We're adjourned till the next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Which will be in February. 7th and 8th.
7th and 8th of February.
She called you out of that, huh? Yeah.
Have you met Debbie?